Okay, welcome everyone. This is, as Sally says, this is obviously a very sad week. The trustees and members of the British Sporting Art Trust mourn the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. They've sent a message of condolence to His Majesty King Charles III and to Her Majesty the Queen Consort, our patron. As Sally said, we did consult before we decided to go ahead with this lecture, and were reassured that it would be appropriate. I would like to thank our speaker, David Haycock, for agreeing to go ahead with today's talk. I'm delighted to welcome you all to what is now the 14th lecture in our series of online talks dealing with various aspects of sporting art. Again, I would like to thank Jamie Rowntree of the Rowntree Tryon Gallery for sponsoring this series. It means that we can continue to put on these talks for free. I would also like to remind you that you can access any of the previous talks through the BSAT website. Again, with David's permission, we are recording this talk for future reference. Today, I'd like to introduce David Boyd Hancock. David is a freelance art historian, curator and lecturer, specialising in 20th century British art and culture. He is the author of a number of books, including Paul Nash in 2001 and A Crisis of Brilliance, 5 Young British Artists and the Great War in 2009. His new biography of Lucy Kemp-Welch is to be published next April 2023. And he is also currently completing a biography of Augustus John. A busy time for David at the moment. He lives in Oxford. As usual, David is happy to answer questions at the end of his talk. The procedure is, as we've done before, is to use the Q&A button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You just type in the questions, I see the questions, and we'll put those questions to David. Thank you for joining us today. So, over to you, David.
Good morning, and thank you very much for coming and tuning in to this talk this morning. And I concur with Tim's earlier remarks about the current situation. So it's nice to have you here to talk about Lucy Kemp-Welch, who is really on a bit of a sort of return to attention. She was really one of the most well-known British female artists of the early 20th century. And she came to renown with this magnificent painting, Colt Hunting in the New Forest, which is currently on display, a long-term loan from the Tate Gallery at Palace House in Newmarket at the National Horse Racing Museum. And it's an enormous painting. For those of you who haven't been able to see it, it's a good 12 feet wide. Lucy was a very small woman, only 5'1" or so, but she loved to paint on an epic, grand scale. And she painted for the Royal Academy. So almost all of her major works were exhibited at the Royal Academy in London at their summer exhibition, which was hugely attended in the late Victorian period. It was one of the great art events of the year, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people would go to the Royal Academy to see the latest works, both by the Royal Academicians, but also by guest entrants, whose work would be received and judged by the RA members, and then if it's thought good enough, would be put up on the walls. Now, this painting caused a real stir when it was exhibited. Usually every year there was one painting that really caught the imagination of the press and the public. And in 1897, it was this painting, Colt Hunting in the New Forest. And it made Lucy Kemp-Welch really famous overnight, quite a sensation. I've been looking up newspaper articles about her, and even in sort of most obscure parts of North America, there were little articles saying young woman astounds London and the RA with enormous painting. So there was a sense that she became really quite famous overnight with this magnificent painting. Now, it's not really a hunting painting. It's called colt hunting. They are hunting the colts. These are the wild horses roaming free in the New Forest, just near to where Lucy Kemp-Welch lived and grew up in her childhood. This is her herself, born in 1869, just outside of Bournemouth, on the edge of the New Forest. She grew up in Bournemouth. Her father was a local solicitor, and she had a sister, a younger sister, Edith, who would also be a very keen painter of nature and of horses. And they really devoted their whole lives to painting, to nature, to horses, to horse riding, and everything really to do with horses. Lucy was obsessed with animals and with horses from a very young age. There's some lovely little early drawings of her in the Bushy Museum in Hertfordshire. A little girl who would just spend all of her time drawing and drawing horses, drawing what she saw around her, but particularly animals. And this is a lovely little letter to one of her aunts, Tommy and the Steamroller. And it's the sort of thing you see children doing. I mean, my children used to draw when they were smaller. They're now teenagers and don't really draw anymore. But Lucy and her sister Edith were those sorts of children who just kept on drawing. And they were encouraged by their parents. Lucy's father was a keen naturalist and would take his daughters into the New Forest to explore and to draw the insects and the animals that they saw around the New Forest. And this is a little book that young Lucy made, again in the Bushy Museum, of the beetles that she found around the New Forest on these long walks that she made with her father. Now, her father didn't particularly want his daughters to go to art school. He thought they drew well enough and should get married and have sort of conventional Victorian lives as young women, getting married, raising children. Lucy and her sister had no interest in that. Art and horses and animals were their absolute devotion. Sadly, her father got ill with tuberculosis and died when she was about 16. And her mother encouraged the daughters to keep drawing, to keep studying. She paid for Lucy to go to a veterinary surgeon in Christchurch, just near Bournemouth, to study anatomy, the anatomy of the horse. And eventually, both girls were recommended to go to an art school in Bushy, in Hertfordshire, which was run by a man named Hubert von Herkomer. Not really so well known today as he was in his own age, in the late Victorian, early Edwardian period. Herkomer, as the name suggests, was German. He was born in Germany, but he grew up in England. His family moved here when he was 5 years old to Southampton, and he became very, very successful, very, very wealthy, painting portraits of the great and the good of Victorian and Edwardian England. Also painted this lovely large painting of Bushy in Hertfordshire in 1890. Now, Lucy Kemp-Welch moved to Bushy in around 1892, so the village would have looked a lot like this when she first arrived. And this actually is almost painted from outside of her house on Bushy High Street. And Herkomer, great fame, great success, opened this art school. As unbelievable as it might sound, Vincent van Gogh heard of the art school. He was a big admirer of Herkomer's work, and Van Gogh briefly thought he might come and study at Herkomer's art school in Bushy. Never happened. If he'd been there, the Herkomer's school would be much more famous than it is today. It no longer exists, but Lucy would take it over for a number of years after Herkomer retired. Now, as I say, the Bushy, the High Street would have looked much like this, a very obviously very rural village, not very far from Watford, not too far north, only 12 miles or so north of London. It's changed considerably in the decades since Lucy moved there. This is Lucy's house in 1940, almost hit by a bomb in the Blitz. That's her house there with the wisteria growing up it and the ladder and the seriously damaged roof. And then this is it again around the year 2000, really rather changed, taken over, as you see, by the motor car. To stand on Bushey High Street today is to have no sense of the little village that it was when Lucy arrived. And that transformation is very important to the transformation of the nature of Lucy's art, going from a very rural place where horses did almost everything, pulled everything, was such a power in the everyday life of Victorian Edwardian England, slowly being replaced by the motor car, by the internal combustion engine, the tractor, taking over from the horse. And it kind of sort of charts in a way Lucy's life and her sort of rise and fall as a painter, and then her rise again in the years since her death, where our interest in that sort of nostalgic old world has come to the fore again. This is one of Herkomer's paintings on strike. Herkomer made lots of very boring portraits, but did a lot of very interesting sort of social recording of life around Bushey. Painted this in Bushey, where it's very much a study of agricultural life, poverty, and identity, the identity of the figures in his Royal Academy painting. And he would transfer this idea of the importance of portraiture, of identity, of individuality to Lucy Kemp-Welch as one of his students, and really his star student, that you have to look and to see and to be out in nature all the time, studying, looking, painting, drawing. And Lucy would make a lot of drawings in which she really focused on the identity, the personality, the nature of the horses that she drew. This would be, this is a study for a painting which is now in the Bushey collection. Many of her works are still in Bushey. Mixed company at a race meeting, 1904. Again, a very large painting, not quite as large as Colt Hunting. It's about 8 feet across, this painting. But you see her attention to detail, her attention to the individuality of the horse. She was an artist very much with an interest in working horses. So not, I'm afraid, sporting horses particularly at all. And certainly not really racing horses. It's the working horse that really interested her. And she painted many, many paintings like this one, Winter's White Silence, on show at Leamington Spa Art Gallery, where it's the focus of the working horse, the daily grind of agricultural England. And this became really her whole métier, her whole identity. She would say that she didn't really find the thoroughbred horse all that interesting. It was much more interesting for her to paint the variety of the working horse. She did paint some sporting images. This is her painting for life from 1908, stag hunting on Dartmoor. And you can just about see, just down, if you can see the arrow, just to the right, you can see hounds, dogs chasing the stag who has hidden himself in amongst the wild horses on Dartmoor. So it's a rare example of Lucy's interest to a small degree in sporting pictures. I mean, she did ride with the hounds, and she was a very, very keen rider, and she would own a horse that was given to her by her friend Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the Boy Scout movement. He lent her his horse, Black Prince, which had been given to him by the people of Australia following the Boer War as a parade horse. It was a bit wild and a bit frisky for the parade ground, so he lent him to Lucy Kemp-Welch as a model for her art school, which she took over from Herkomer and ran for about 15, 20 years in Bushey. And this is not Lucy riding BP, as she called the horse, Black Prince, but a friend up in Yorkshire. And the man on the white horse, sort of a figure sort of slightly obviously behind and to the distance. And it's a painting about the woman rider. And it does give a sense that Lucy Kemp-Welch wasn't a very emancipated modern woman in this period, which in her way she was. She never got married. She ran this art school. She'd be the first woman in England to be the head of an art school with both male and female students in it. Interestingly enough, she was never actually a suffragette and actually joined a movement, an anti-suffragette movement around this time. But she wasn't traditional. And when it was suggested to her later in her life that her work might be shown in an exhibition of female artists, she was very much against that idea and didn't want to be known or shown as a woman artist. But just to be shown as an artist, a painter in her own right. Her gender in that respect didn't matter to her at all. There'd be a lot of talk at the time that Lucy might become the first woman elected since its foundation to the Royal Academy. There had been two original women in the Royal Academy when it was founded, just over 250 years ago now, in the early 1720s. I think it's the right date, but basically there hadn't been a woman elected since its foundation, and there was talk that the RA ought to be getting around to electing a woman, and it was thought that Lucy Kemp-Welch would be that woman. She was nominated at least 3 times, but would never be elected. She was quite a Germanophile. Through Herkomer, she was very interested in Germany and German matters. And when the Kaiser came over to visit England in the years just before the outbreak of the First World War, Lucy would have an exhibition of her work for the Kaiser to come and visit, and actually painted a version of colt hunting as a gift for him. That changed obviously very rapidly in 1914. Herkomer died in early 1914, and the fact of his being German partly explains the loss of his significance in the centuries since. Lucy Kemp-Welch would become very patriotic. And very early on, she was commissioned to make a poster for the war effort. And here again, she uses Baden-Powell's horse Black Prince as the subject for this recruitment poster, which was very widely seen. She also used Black Prince as the model for Black Beauty when she was commissioned in 1915 to do a series of illustrations for Anna Sewell's famous 1877 novel. Lucy's father had bought her a copy as soon as it came out of Black Beauty, so she was delighted to be able to illustrate it. And it has been suggested that it was at its day the best-selling illustrated children's book ever, with Lucy's illustrations in it. And that's perhaps what she's really still most famous for, is those illustrations to Black Beauty, which are still available in various forms, numerous books with numerous versions of Black Beauty with Lucy's illustrations. She was keen to paint the war, Lucy. She wanted to get out to France, and she volunteered with the Red Cross, with all sorts of organizations, to try and get over to France to paint the war firsthand. And the British government was sending artists out to France to paint the war, but it wouldn't send a female artist. And Lucy's friend Alfred Munnings would eventually be commissioned by the Canadian government to go to France and paint horses. And Munnings' career would really take off from that moment, from 1918, 1919, when he became very famous for his paintings of the Canadian horses and the Canadian war effort. And he would go on to be elected to the Royal Academy and eventually became president of the RA. But actually in 1917 was not as famous as an equestrian artist as Lucy Kemp-Welch was. So she really missed out on that opportunity as a woman for what would have been really even greater success. So this painting was made on Salisbury Plain. And Lucy would get these enormous canvases and actually set them up in the place where the event that she was painting took place. So colt hunting was painted in the New Forest on a large canvas set up in the New Forest. Similarly, this very large painting was set up on Salisbury Plain, and she started painting. She'd made lots of pencil drawings, hundreds of pencil drawings, tiny little pencil drawings. Many of those for her early works are to be seen in a current display as well in Palace House at the moment. And then took these away and took the studio back, the canvas back to her studio to finish it off. And this painting, like Colt Hunting, was bought by the Chantry Bequest, which was run by the Royal Academy, a huge gift of money to buy paintings. And it was very rare for a woman to be included in the Chantry Bequest purchases. Colt Hunting was bought in 1897 for the nation, hence it being in the Tate, and Forward the Guns was similarly bought in 1919 for the nation and to be seen in the Tate Gallery. She was also commissioned at the end of the war by the Imperial War Museum. Again, no chance to go out to France, but she painted this at a remount depot in Wiltshire. So women working with horses that were being trained to go out to France. And the remount depot was just about to close. And she painted again this very large, very epic painting, which sadly is boxed away at the Imperial War Museum. I asked recently to go and see it, and I was told it would cost at least £1,000 to have it taken out of its box and shown to me, which is a real shame, a real sadness, because it's really quite an extraordinary piece of work. She was commissioned to do a very large mural at the Royal Exchange in the City of London, women's work in the Great War, which is still there to be seen today. The only woman to have one of these commissions, one of these murals. After the war, she would become a bit more interested in sporting art. So this is one of her paintings of polo, probably painted down in West Sussex, where she'd spend a lot of time after the war. And she also painted at Goodwood, down in West Sussex. This is a beautiful little edgy study for a start at Goodwood, which I'm really rather fond of. But her real area of interest after the First World War and before the Second World War was the circus. And she did a great amount of traveling around with the circus. Every year she would hitch a caravan to the back of her little Ford and travel around with the circus. The circus was quite a popular subject in this period. Laura Knight, who would become the first female full Royal Academician, was a keen painter at this time of the circus as well. And Lucy would do a lot of work in pastel, and she was an absolutely fabulous worker in pastel. This is an absolutely divine piece of work, which is up in Newcastle. And here, aristocrats, the circus horses. This again at Bushy Museum. Then painting within the circus, traveling around, spending all day for weeks and weeks with the circus, painting outside, and as you see here, painting inside as well. So I hope it gives you some sense of Lucy Kemp-Welch, a very long, very illustrious life. As I said, probably, well, really one of the most well-known female artists of the late 19th, early 20th century through to about the Second World War or so. She exhibited year after year after year at the Royal Academy until eventually her eyesight started to go. She got old and she stopped traveling with the circus. She stopped painting, she stopped exhibiting, and she died in Bushy in 1958. Much of her work is still to be seen at Bushy Museum, and I am currently curating an exhibition which is going to be at the Russell Coates Art Gallery in Bournemouth next year, which will then be travelling on to Newmarket and the National Horse Racing Museum. But that's my time, and I think we have time now for some questions, please.
Thank you very much, David. I think you've given us a better appreciation of the work of Lucy. A few questions. Why did you choose, of all the subjects, to concentrate on Lucy? Is it just because she was forgotten, or was there something else that drew you to her study?
It's a good question. The reason was I work for David Messham's Fine Art as a freelance writer, and I've been working with David Messam for about 4 years now. David has an art gallery in Mayfair, and David took on Lucy's estate in the late 1960s. And he owns the copyright on all her work. So David's kindly agreed copyright for showing the images. And David asked me if I would write a book about Lucy. I did vacillate, because she's not the sort of artist I normally write about. I'm very interested in the really modern artists of the 20th century, people like Stanley Spencer, Paul Nash. But I was very interested in her war work, and it was very interesting also to write about a woman. I'd not written about a woman artist on her own before. I'd written about Dora Carrington a little bit, but it was interesting to be able to write about a woman, and to write about somebody with such a close affiliation with the Royal Academy, because the Royal Academy comes up a great deal in my work, and I didn't really feel like I knew a great deal about the role and the influence of the Royal Academy. So that was why. Plus, my sister was a very keen horse rider, as is my sister-in-law and my niece. So it was always a nice chance to write about horses, which was very appealing as well.
So some good personal reasons. She was, I'd spotted in a number of the examples you showed, female subjects. Was that a significant subject for her, female riders?
She doesn't particularly say so. No. I think she painted sort of whoever she could, really. So it just depended on who her subjects were. I mean, she lived in Bushey her entire adult life, in that house Kingsley on the High Street, with her sister Edith until Edith's death in 1941. So they were very, very close. And then she had a very close friend, Margaret Frobisher, who then moved in to live with her after her sister's death. So I think they were all keen horse riders. So they were there as very easy subjects. One thing I haven't addressed is actually, which I should have mentioned, is about photography. I don't know if anyone's asked about photography, but photography was hugely influential, obviously, in the late 19th century, and artists were having to sort of react to photography. And Lucy would talk a lot about not using photographs in her paintings or her drawings. And there's some very interesting early interviews with her where she talks in great detail about why she's sort of against using photography in her work, and how she feels it's rather sort of static, because I mean, as you see in the picture here, rather static to use a photograph. And she'd talk about the importance to her of making what she called snaps, sort of photo snaps in her own mind, and that she could almost sort of take a photograph in her own mind and then render these incredible drawings of animals in motion. So that's a very interesting aspect of her work and her attitude to her work.
I was struck when I went round the exhibition at Newmarket, references to her sister. And her sister was sharing the sketchbooks. Did I?
That's correct, yes.
Correctly. And did she continue with her artistic career, or did she just support her sister?
Well, Edith did continue with her career, and Edith also exhibited at the Royal Academy, but not as frequently, and certainly with none of the acclaim that Lucy received. So Edith, she lived with Lucy. Lucy made a great deal of money, really, from her work. She was constantly sort of being sought after. I mentioned about sort of painting sort of portraits of horses. So many of her works would be portraits of horses for clients who would come to her and say, I want a portrait of my horse. So she made a great deal of money doing that, and with the money also from the sales from the chantry bequest. So Edith basically lived with her. They lived together, shared the house, but it was principally Lucy who was making the money, making the income, and selling and exhibiting successfully.
Was Bushy a commercial success as an art school, or?
Not really, no. Herkimer wasn't. I mean, Herkimer set up a very good school, and it was very highly regarded, but there were very few well-known artists who came through it. The only other well-known artist who did come through the school was William Nicholson, father of Ben Nicholson, but he didn't really like his experience of working with Herkimer. So there aren't any other big names aside from William Nicholson and Lucy Kemp-Welch who came through the school. And when Lucy took it over, she took it over rather reluctantly, because Bushy had become something of an artist's colony. So Herkimer did encourage his students to stay in Bushy once they'd finished studying at the school. And there were many sort of ramshackle studios around the village with artists living and working in them. So for a while, it was quite a community of artists, and Lucy felt it was quite important to keep that going. And she left money after she died for an art gallery to be opened in Bushy, exhibiting her work. So many of the works that are now in Bushy Museum were bequeathed by Lucy to have an art gallery, which was built just opposite her house, just by the church, and was to be there to sort of keep this idea of Bushy as a artist colony going. But it didn't survive really after the Second World War. It had been in decline since the 1920s.
One of the questions we've got is much of where is Lucy's work? And I suppose it leads on to a wider question. How difficult has it been to put together an exhibition of her work? Is it in private hands? Is it public display?
The vast majority of it is in private hands. So David Messam over the years has sold a huge quantity of Lucy's work, from the little drawings to the watercolors to the large paintings. Many of the really large paintings are in national collections. So there's those two in the Tate Gallery, there's a number in the Imperial War Museum, there's one down in Bristol, at Bristol Art Gallery, there's one in the Art Gallery in Exeter, there's one which was bought for Australia and is in the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia. The Russell Coates Art Gallery in Bournemouth, they have a number of important works. But much of it, as I say, is still in private hands or in Bushy Museum. Bushy Museum has a very extensive collection. And the Bushy Museum collection is the foundation of the exhibition which we will have at the Russell Coates Museum and at the Horse Racing Museum next year. There are, there are also a number of lost works. There's a painting that she made called Drought in the New Forest, which she exhibited at the Royal Academy just before, the year before Colt hunting, which is again a very large painting, some 12 feet across, was sold at Christie's in about 1924 and hasn't been seen since. So that's a work we're quite keen to track down if we can. So there are these sort of lost works as well, which is very interesting.
I thought a painting titled Drought was very appropriate for this year.
Yeah.
We have included that in the next newsletter. So hopefully on seeing it, maybe our members or viewers of this lecture will be able to help you identify where it might be now.
Yes, and equally,
actually, it still exists. It looks a good painting.
Well, hopefully it still does. I'm sure it does somewhere. I mean, it's such an enormous painting that I'm sure no one would have sort of thrown it out, hopefully. But yes, it'll be interesting to discover it. But yes, equally, if people do know of works by Lucy in private hands, I'd be delighted to hear from them if they think they might be something that could be included in the exhibition. I'm particularly keen to find some more of her pastels and her drawings and watercolors of the circus.
Did you, in your research, find out about the practical details? I was very aware of the hanging of colt hunting at Palace House. It required considerable equipment, ladders. I think it was a team of 12 men in the end were required to lift it up. I think the frame itself was heavy as well. And it's not the sort of picture that's going to be easily moved.
No.
It's in a good position to be seen. But she was a small woman, as you say. These are large canvases. Even without a frame, they're going to be heavy and difficult to manage. Did you pick up any sense of the practical problems she faced?
I did, to a degree. I mean, she was able to sort of, well, there were lots of sort of young men at the Bushy Art School who were very willing to sort of carry canvases around for her and help her out. And then with the war work, she was very good at sort of making connections with the right sort of people. So the army helped a great deal with moving those canvases around for her. There's lots of remarks in her diaries about shipping these canvases around England. It seemed much more easy to do that back then than today. And a lot of them just were sort of traveling around on trains. And whenever she went anywhere on holiday, she'd have her horse taken down by train to wherever she was on holiday. So there's always lots of comments in her diaries about picking up her horse from a station somewhere. So it seemed if you were wealthy enough, there was enough sort of cheap labor back then to be able to sort of pay a few shillings to people to sort of move large canvases around for you. But it
doesn't sound very easy to me.
I don't think it was easy, but I don't think she had to sort of worry about it too much. I think there was such a great deal of, as I say, sort of men. I mean, you saw the on strike, the Herkimer painting. I mean, an agricultural village in an era being taken over by mechanization. A lot of farm labourers with not much work to do and willing to carry large canvases around for a few shillings, I'm sure.
The exhibitions, did you have dates? You mentioned them coming up at Russell Coates and Newmarket. Do you have dates in mind yet?
We do, yes. It's opening at the Russell Coates Art Gallery and Museum on the 1st of April next year. I don't know if people know Bournemouth particularly, but the Russell Coates Museum is a wonderful house built for a very wealthy hotel owner in the very early 20th century, and has an extraordinary collection of art, all sorts of late Victorian artists. And they have a number of Lucy's works. And so that opens there on the 1st of April next year, and will run through until the beginning of October. And then it transfers to Newmarket in mid-October and will run till the end of January 2024.
And your book comes out when?
My book comes out to coincide with the opening at Russell Coates, so that'll be the beginning of April next year. And then I've got this Augustus John book, which comes out in June. So there's a slight overlap. They've got very similar dates, Lucy Kemp-Welch and Augustus John. They're almost exact contemporaries. And they both shared an interest in gypsies as well, actually. I'm not mentioning that about Lucy, but that was another one.
Well, I suppose Alfred Munnings did as well. And you mentioned Munnings earlier.
Yes.
Was he a friend or just an acquaintance?
Well, just an acquaintance, really. Lucy, with some friends just before the First World War, started a society of animal painters. And Lucy was the first president of the Society of Animal Painters. And Munnings joined that society in 1914. So yeah, there's a note in her diary where she says going for tea with Munnings. but that's all that I've seen. They don't seem to have had a relationship subsequent, or a friendship, so far as I've been able to establish, subsequent to that. Munnings, again, was the exact same dates as Lucy, but sort of appeared on the art scene later than Lucy, and didn't have that. I mean, Lucy, as I said, had this moment where she exhibited colt hunting and became famous overnight. Munnings' career took much longer time to get itself established, and he was actually looking to Lucy as a sort of a guide in a way to how he might develop his career.
Did you, so you don't see him as an influence on her work?
Oh, no, not at all, not at all, no.
And have you determined who was influencing her work, or was she?
Really, not really. There was a French artist called Bonheur. I can't remember, is Louise Bonheur?
Rosa Bonheur, or?
Rosa, yes, Rosa Bonheur, who was, she was compared to all the time with Rosa Bonheur, but I don't know that she did see Rosa's work in Paris later in her life, just before the First World War, but I wouldn't really call her an influence. So it's not really clear who her influences were. Lucy said that living in Bournemouth, she hadn't seen a great deal of art before she came to Herkomer's school. So in a way, Herkomer is the great influence, I think, on her. In terms of painting, Herkomer never painted animals. And he actually, when he did need to paint some animals in some of his paintings, he asked Lucy to come and sort of paint them in for him. So he wasn't interested in animal painting, but he was very concerned with painting out of doors. And it was he who had this idea of actually sort of putting the canvas into the place where you were going to paint, and sort of almost rigidly fixing it in place and leaving it there. So there would be sort of doors on these canvases, open and closed, that she could leave them for weeks out in the place where she was working, and sort of come back to them on sort of every day to work in situ. So I'm not saying that Herkomer was the first, obviously wasn't the first artist to go and paint outdoors. The Impressionists have been doing that first, but certainly this idea of really settling yourself into the landscape and actually almost camping out where you were painting.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask was, David, I'm sorry to cut across you, Tim, was you mentioned that the picture of the remount at the Imperial War Museum was not on display, and I gather from the past that colt hunting was in store for a long time. Why do you think that some of her paintings have not been on display by the people that hold them for the nation? What do you think the reason is?
Well, I think it's because Lucy, she did go out of fashion. So her obituary in the Times says this, that if you imagine the period of 20th century art, the story of 20th century art with Cubism, Vorticism, Futurism, Post-Impressionism, it's not realism like this, like Lucy was doing. So I think there was a sense that with the war art, they wanted to put out artists like Paul Nash and Percy Wyndham Lewis. There is John Singer Sargent's painting, obviously, Gast from 1918, which is academic realist painting. But Sargent was a hugely famous, and remained so, hugely famous artist. And I think just Lucy wasn't really well known enough, or was forgotten ultimately. And so she was forgotten by the time of her death. She was really pretty unknown. And I've said that, with the beginning, partly because just the whole process of modernism and mechanization through the course of the 20th century, this sort of interest in the horse, which was hugely significant to the Victorians and the Edwardians, became sort of more and more old-fashioned and forgotten. And I think that's partly explains sort of some of her revival in more recent years, as we've become more interested in looking back at that sort of era. I mean, I haven't seen the Straw Ride, but I mean, just looking here, it's the structure of the painting, the way she's conceived it is marvelous and so sort of dynamic and so exciting. But it's such a disappointment not to be able to see it. And I'm sure it will come out. The Army Museum, it's the National Army Museum in London. They have a smaller work from the First World War that Lucy painted. I think it's a study for the guns.
I gather we're very grateful to Messams for being able to display colt hunting.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I mean, with sorry, I was just going to say with regard to the other one, I do think as there's a greater awareness that we need to appreciate these female artists from this period. I'm sure this work will come out and will eventually be seen. But yeah, David Messam was back in the I think it was the early 90s. He wanted to show colt hunting at his gallery in Cork Street. And that Tate told him eventually, oh, it's not in good enough condition. It can't be taken out, so you can't borrow it. And David just got fed up with this, and actually David Messam paid the cost to have the painting restored, and then showed it in his gallery, which was the first time it had been out on show since I think the exhibition in about 1948. And so then it came out then, and then I don't think it had been out again then until it was taken to Newmarket again,
which is incredible because it's one of our star pictures here in Newmarket, and
yes.
Anybody who sees it is absolutely taken by it. And the picture of the straw ride, I'm very familiar with it, and it's stunning, and it seems such a shame that it can't go out on display.
Yeah, well, I think it is the expense. So it is packed away, it's boxed up and packed away, and I'm sure, I don't know, I've not heard of it being exhibited since the end of the First World War when it was painted. I've not heard of it being on show since then. So goodness knows what condition. I mean, you know, my dreams is kind of in mint condition in this box, but you know, who knows what it's like.
Perhaps we should have a campaign to get it brought out so that we can make our own decision about it.
Well, it would be wonderful. I mean, and I'm sure if a campaign could be done, and then to raise the money to pay for the restoration, which isn't necessarily a huge sum of money, it would be extraordinary to be able to show it. But many of these museums, I mean, the IWM is sort of under-resourced, understaffed, so it's quite difficult. I mean, the museum has another smaller painting of the remount depot, which we have asked for loan. And we're sort of banging at their door saying, you know, they've acknowledged our request, but we haven't heard back from them yet as to whether we can borrow it or not.
And they are very big pictures, and they need a big space, and not many galleries do have that space. And
no, it's an issue of space. I mean, I do not know really, in a way, who Lucy was making these paintings for. It tended to be people with very large houses. So there were sort of people who also worked sort of like industrialists who'd made a lot of money, sort of Manchester industrialists, railway magnates, people like that, who were buying these large Royal Academy paintings to go on the walls of very large houses that they were either buying from impoverished aristocracy or having built for themselves.
And we have to thank National Lottery for funding the displays at Palace House, which enabled us to afford to get it down here, and the Tate, who especially Tabitha Barther, who helped initiate that loan at the time. So we were very grateful, and as I said, it's one of the star pictures, and anybody who hasn't seen it should come down to NHRN, especially the members, and you don't pay to get in, so there's no excuse not to come and have a look at it.
And especially as the drawings are still there from this sketchbook up in the gallery just next door upstairs at Palace House, which are fantastic. And it's just, I mean, it's extraordinary to see when you see the drawings. They're tiny. They're little just handheld sketchbooks from which she transferred into these absolutely enormous paintings. And she was.
It was such a shock to see them, actually, and they're exquisite, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
And And she'd spend months on these. I mean, every year she'd spend from sort of December through until the spring painting her Royal Academy subject painting. I mean, they did get smaller through her life, and by after the First World War, she didn't really paint on this scale again. She was having to sort of scale back on size, but also possibly because people weren't really actually buying these sorts of works anymore. Or this, works of this scale.
David, I think we're reaching the end. I'd like to thank you for your time this morning. Let's hope that your book and the exhibition, both at Bournemouth and Newmarket, stimulates more interest in Lucy Kemp-Welch, that your campaign and your support of David Messam is successful. Thank you very much for this morning, and
Thank you.
perhaps we will be seeing the straw ride out in the open in the near future as a result of your work. So thank you very much.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Sally.
Our next online lecture will be on Thursday, 6th of October. Just to make it clear, it's the 6th of October, not any other date you might have seen. So it's Thursday, the 6th of October, and it will be at 2 o'clock. It's going to be Nathan Fliss, who's talking about Francis Barlow, the father of British sporting art. It will be at 2 o'clock because Nathan is talking from the US. He produced an acclaimed PhD dissertation on Barlow a few years ago, and he's also agreed to write our essay for the autumn this year, which will come out in late October, early November. The interest in Barlow was stimulated by our visit in the summer to the home of Bill and Philippa Tyrwhitt-Drake in Hampshire, and Bill has inherited 9 5 pictures by Barlow and added one from his own resources. We recognized when we went to Hampshire that the Trust hadn't paid sufficient attention to this very early but very important artist. So it's Thursday, the 6th of October at 2 o'clock for the next online talk. And I'd also like to remind you that our annual general meeting for members and non-members will be at Welbeck in Nottinghamshire on the 15th of October. Details have already been sent out, but if you need more details or would like to attend, please call Sally. So thank you very much, David, for your talk this morning. And thank you everybody for supporting us with this series of lectures. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much.